After my video on the Stabber II recently, I had a lot of requests to cover the other T10 Cruiser IIs, which is to say the Omen II, the Caracal II, and the Vexor II. Now, I've briefly talked about the Vexor II in a previous video, I've covered the Caracal II quite extensively in other videos, and I do intend to get around to the Omen II eventually, though I do need to source one, but I thought for today's video this was the perfect opportunity for me to actually talk about the Vexor II. Now, Bradric actually gifted me this ship a good few months ago now, and it's pretty much sat in my hangar other than a few tests here and there. It was one of those ships I was really kind of struggling with, but with new information regarding the Stabber II, I decided to sit down and talk to a few other Vexor pilots about what their opinions on this were, and to talk about it in relation to some of the other cruisers available once you hit tech level 10. And that's basically what we're going to be doing in this video, so huge shout out and thank you to Bradric for inspiring this video and indeed donating the Vexor II to actually make it possible, because this is not a cruiser I would otherwise have flown. We're going to be comparing this to other similar cruisers at tech level 10 that you could be flying and saying, is the Vexor II worth it? So ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie and welcome to another video for Eve Echoes. These videos are not sponsored by NetEase in any way, so if you do want to keep me making content like this, you can help out for free just by hitting the like and subscribe button down below. Beyond that, if you do want to go the extra mile to help keep me making content like this, I have a Patreon page and a Redbubble merchandise store that you can check out. Both are linked in the description down below as well. With all that said and done though, let's talk about the Vexor II. The Vexor II is the Gallente Federation's T10 Cruiser II, or the attack cruisers as they're sometimes known. Now, the Vexor line starts all the way down at Tech 5 with the Vexor and the Vexor Trainer. The Vexor Trainer is one of the options you can get out of your first cruiser trainer boxes early on in your first couple of days. Then we have the Vexor Navy issue at Tech level 6, and at Tech level 8 this goes up to the Vexor Sniper. It's then a while before you can fly the Vexor II at Tech level 10. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. And we're going to be comparing this with one of the alternative drone ships that you could be flying at this tech level as well, which is the Arbitrator 3 Covert Ops. We'll also touch briefly upon, if I go into it now, the Gurustus Pirates Healer, because these are obviously drone ships, kind of thing that you might be interested in if you're looking at flying a Vexor II. But first of all, let's talk about the Vexor II itself. Let's give the ship a fair crack of the whip to stand on its own 2 feet. So here you can see the ship. I do quite like the look of the Vexor. It's not one of my favourite cruisers by a long stretch, but it's certainly not the worst either. It reminds me a lot of the Needler from the Halo series of games, especially once you put some of the skins on it. It starts to look a lot like it. The Comet skin is absolutely one of my favourite. I love that Comet contrail on it. And as you saw earlier, I think it's the High Noon? No, it's the Sunset that I'm using. The Sunset skin on this because that just looks really cool. I love that fade to orange at the very tip. Let's have a look at the attributes and fittings profile though. So this is different from the other Cruiser IIs at Tech 10 in that this is a drone cruiser, emblematic of the fact that it's got 5 drone tubes. These will take small or medium drones only. We have only 2 high slots to work with, and you can kind of put whatever you fancy in those. 3 mids is okay. I kind of wish it was 4 on some of these sometimes, but hey, there we go. 5 lows for a decent amount of versatility there, and of course 3 for each of the rigs. The power grid at 716 megawatts is not terrible. It's a drone ship, so it doesn't really need much in the way of power grid. It's lower than some of the others at this tech level, but that's simply because you just don't need it. Defensively, we're looking at 16,918, not bad across the board, and it is very much aimed around armor and structure. Structure, curiously, being the highest one. It is a Gallente ship after all. Armor is where you're mainly going to want to tank this. It doesn't have very good shields at all. You can see only 4,042 shield compared to 4,876 armor. The armor also has better natural resistances. If you were to total all of those up, you'll see that it comes to a higher amount than on the shield. You'll notice obviously shield has a complete weakness to electromagnetic, whereas even explosive, the traditional weakness for armor, at least there is a 10% resistance basic there to start off with. Capacitors aren't terrible either, 2,390 gigajoules, decent recharge rate and recharge time, nothing special by any stretch, but considering you're going to be armor tanking is fairly lax on the capacitor anyway. It's gentle on capacitor usage, so you don't have to worry too much about that. Signature radius, the Vexor II is a bit larger than some of its contemporaries. Scan resolution also is a little bit lower. Sensor strength we don't worry about because it's not a thing in Eve Echoes. Flight velocity isn't awful either, and the mass and inertia actually give us a really nice agility rating, which means the Vexor is astonishingly nimble. Like, for a cruiser of this size and speed, you'd think it's going to be really quite slow to align. That is kind of the Gallente trick. They're not as fast in a straight line, but when it comes to orbiting or changing direction quickly, they're actually pretty good at that. Under the trait descriptions, we've got a roll bonus plus 5 seconds of damage control activation time. This is shared across all of the Cruiser 2s at tech level 10, so the Stabber 2, the Omen 2, and the Caracal 2, they all have that damage control activation time. They then get bonuses from Advanced Medium Weapon Operation and Advanced Cruiser Command. Now, in this case, the weapon operation bonus is for advanced medium drone operation, as would be expected. 25% drone damage for a total of 125% in completion at full level 5 there. That is basically more than doubling the power of each of those drones. You're acting as if you have, rather than 5 drones, you're going to be looking as if you've got basically 12.5 drones. It's pretty powerful for its damage, although drones do have some inherent weaknesses that we'll talk about in a moment. Then we've got drone EHP on here, 25% drone EHP at full training, not bad at all, and an additional 15 kilometers of drone command range. Now, this is actually one of the things that makes the Vexor surprisingly useful. I think people underestimate the drone command range thing, because drones are as effective if your ship is at maximum range as they are if your ship is at 0 range. So you can comfortably go either way. As long as you're staying within drone command range, your drones are going to be as effective as ever. Like, the distance that your ship is away from the target doesn't matter, because the drones are the ones doing the damage. It only matters when you look at what your high slot is going to be, and you'll notice that there's no bonus here to any of the traditional high slots. There's no missile damage, railgun damage, or things like that, so you are free to pretty much put whatever you like in that high slot. This is a really cool thing that I do honestly really quite like about Eve Echoes, that you have much more versatility with drone ships in regards to what you put in the high slots than you would in Eve Online, and it's a really cool little thing. It's a nice touch, and I do think that that gives the Vexor II some sort of versatility. It also means that if you don't want to go for a drone implant, for example, perhaps you're flying the Vexor II as a sideline, it's just a drone ship, whilst otherwise you're flying laser ships or things. Maybe you've got an Apocalypse Striker that you use for ratting, and you decide that you want to have a Vexor II for PvP, then the medium drone skills and then medium lasers, that's going to twin off your laser implant and do some really nice things with that. Of course, if you are a drone main, then yeah, you're going to want to go for the drone implant on this one, but it's just worth mentioning that, like, for me, I'm a missile main, I have a missile implant, that will work on the Vexor II. Nice. Finally then, Advanced Cruiser Command bonus here, 5% reduction to the inertia modifier. We've already got a very low inertia modifier. This means the Vexor II, as I said, is actually astonishingly nimble to realign, to turn itself around, to change its orbit. You can do a lot with this. It's not the fastest ship, but it is very much one of the most agile cruisers. Now, of course, the first comparison that we're going to have to make with the Vexor II is against the Arbitrator III Covert Ops. They are very similar ships, and I have actually done an entire video dedicated to exactly this subject, so I'm not going to go completely in-depth on this. You can kind of have a look at the stats, watch that video if you want a full breakdown on everything, but you'll find that the Vexor II and the Arbitrator III Covert Ops are actually pretty close. Obviously, the Arbitrator III Covert Ops has that advantage of being able to use Covert Ops cloaking devices. It has sinusoidal field generators. It's got a lot more stuff going on there than the Vexor II does. The Vexor II is a straight-up combat ship, not much in the way of versatility, but the Vexor II is a brute. It may not actually have as much defense on paper as the Arbitrator III Covert Ops, which really struck me as quite strange when I saw that, because you think of the Covert Ops ships as being quite gentle and fragile, 18,434 on the Arbitrator III, whereas the Vexor II is only 16,918. It's quite a big difference when you then factor in how things work with your cruiser defense upgrade, for example. But ultimately, the Vexor II comes out incredibly tanky due to the additional 5th low slot and the fact that we've got that damage control activation time bonus, and that really should not be underestimated. I'm not much of a PvPer at all. I prefer arena-style PvP to going roaming. I've covered that in numerous videos before, but ultimately the Arbitrator III kind of makes a better sort of elegant tool. It's the kind of ship that you need a bit more finesse to use very well, whereas the Vexor II is a brute. It will just hit, do damage, and take damage. Ultimately, when it came to me testing this, I test in PvE for the most part, because PvE is what I do. Vexor II, not a great PvE ship, because its DPS is so incredibly low compared to its compatriots. But what about the Vexor II compared to the healer? Well, again, this is pretty much a no-brainer, I'm afraid. If you have the healer and the Vexor II, and you've got the skills to fly either, I'm sorry to say the healer is just going to pull ahead. The healer is just a better ship across the board, but that does come with the understanding that the healer requires you to have trained both medium missile and medium drone skills. You are going to need both of those skills to get the most out of it. Whereas the Vexor II has a little bit more versatility, as I said. If you wanted to put lasers on the Vexor II, or railguns, or cannons, heck, if you wanted to put medium decomposers on it because you're a complete lunatic, you can do. The healer, on the other hand, it is just infinitely more tanky than the Vexor II. The Vexor II is a tanky beast as it is, but the healer is even more tanky, and the healer does out-DPS it as well. So, yeah, if you've got the skills for the healer, then it is probably going to be the better option. That said, the Vexor II, you can occasionally pick it up a little bit cheaper on the market, and as someone pointed out the other day on the Stabber 2 video, the big advantage of these is that they don't drop faction debris when you inevitably die with them. Ultimately, I don't think the Vexor II is a bad ship. I just think the healer does outclass it a little bit if you've got it set up right, and the Arbitrator offers a very enticing secondary option. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't use the Vexor II, and if it's something you're interested in using, here are my thoughts. Now again, before we go any further on this one, Benzie needs to remind you all, I am not a PvPer. My information when it comes to fits like this comes from other players, and this one was suggested primarily by Bradric, but with some tweaks suggested by some other players as well, that kind of pointed some really interesting goings on here. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is, of course, we've got 5 drones. These can be whatever you fancy. I've put in some of the, I want to call the hobgoblins, they're not, they're hammerheads. Hammerheads in there at the moment, and with Mark 9 hammerheads, you can see our DPS is a pitiful 594. It doesn't even break 600 with 5 drones. That is one of the problems that we were talking about with drones earlier. Now, of course, if you put faction drones in, that is going to be higher, and it will be notably higher. It comes in around 660, 670 at that point, which is just a better number to start with. But then on the high slots here, I've gone for 2 Republic Fleet large rapid missile launchers. Republic Fleet, because those will fit within the power grid. If you go higher than Republic Fleet, unfortunately, they will not fit in the remaining power grid with this fit. This means that ultimately the Vexor is using drones which are lower DPS than a lot of their equal systems, on the simple fact that you can only get up to faction level drones, that meta level 6, whereas other weapons go all the way up to meta level 11 or even higher, you know, C-types being the obviously really easy to get nowadays, B-types and A-types and X-types being higher meta level but considerably harder to get and probably not the kind of thing you'll want to be putting on a PvP ship. Whereas this Vexor fit, you are basically going to be stuck using Meta Level 6 weaponry. Meta Level 6 high slots here for the Republic Fleet large missile launchers, and Meta Level 6 if you want to put the drones in all the way up to the full-on Federation Navy Hammerheads, or the Caldari Navy Vespers, or whatever you want to put in there. Most people tend to go for the Warriors, the Minmatar Republic Warriors. They're fast-moving, they've got good tracking and fairly equal DPS, just obviously be aware that that does put you into an explosive damage, and you may have to pick your targets accordingly. It is nice though to see that with that extra power grid we can fit large rapid missile launchers. These have the exact same application as medium missiles but higher DPS. So ultimately, yeah, you could put 2 medium missile launcher C-types in here, but you'll actually get lower DPS than you would with the Republic Fleet large rapid. So yeah, we've got that kind of going for us, which is nice. For the mid slots then, a Caldari Navy Warp Disruptor gives us 2 points of Warp Jammer Strength at range. You can swap this for a Scram if you decide that you'd rather brawl with things. I've gone for a Republic Fleet Target Painter. Again, this could be a web. I've simply gone for the Target Painter here because that gives me the versatility of still using it outside of 15 kilometers, which obviously the Vexor II can do, because we've got a range here on the missiles of 36 kilometers, and we've got a drone command range of, let's just tap into that, a drone command range of 49 kilometers. So if you're sitting at 35, 36 kilometers, this is still doing 100% DPS. Obviously, your drones are going to be able to hit at that range as well. Your missiles are going to be hitting, your drones are going to be hitting. If you need to come closer, you can do. If you want to go further away, if you want to go all the way up to that maximum range, you can do. So if you have a web on here, a web is theoretically better, but only if you're within range of it. 14.6 kilometers or whatever it is for a standard Predator web means if you are at 16 or 17 kilometers, the target painter is just going to be flat out better, am I right? And rounding that out, a Federation Navy sensor dampener. Now, ultimately, these are something that don't often get much use, and the Vexor II has no particular bonus to them, but I really rate these on drone ships because they force your opponents to spend an absolute age locking onto your drones, and if they don't lock onto your drones, they're missing out on the opportunity to massively reduce your DPS, right? So ultimately what you're doing here is slowing down that lock speed, and so when they start shooting at one of your drones, you recall that drone and then you send it straight back out again. You've broken the lock. They then have to lock onto another drone and start shooting that one. It's just a nice little tactic that I think does work really well, and I know a lot of drone pilots who do use sensor dampeners in PvP, and if you're part of a small fleet or roam, multiple sensor dampeners can absolutely wreck someone's day. I'm not suggesting you go hunting battleships in this. I really don't think it's going to hold it. Bradric is absolutely adamant that you can use this as a bruiser in things like gate camps. The speed of the drones and the damage and the application they can do means you're actually pretty good against any frigates that you can catch, destroyers that you can catch, and you'll actually do pretty well against most cruisers due to just how tanky the Vexor can be. It obviously comes down to picking your targets. Speaking of tankiness, for the low slots, of course, we're taking advantage of that damage control bonus. Pop that for 5 seconds of absolute brute force resistances. Nothing is getting through those for the period that is active. 18 seconds? 18 seconds? 18 seconds, yeah, it is 18 seconds. It's been a while since I used a DCU. Followed by then 2 Corellum C-type medium armor repairers. 2 medium armor repairers is considerably more armor repair than 1 large armor repairer of equal meta level. Obviously, the large armor repairer only takes up 1 slot, but the 2 mediums not only heal more, but they actually have a lower activation cost too. Nice little trick there. So having 2 of these running at all times alongside a single adaptive armor hardener is going to make us nice and tanky. Then you can pop the DCU just to give yourself 18 seconds of almost near invulnerability, whilst those armor repairers boost you all the way back up to full armor. A simple medium afterburner here just gives us a bit more maneuverability on this build. The ability to close range if we need to, the ability to move away if we need to, kind of up to you. There were some suggestions of swapping this out for a battery for a bit more sort of capacitor stability. Some people did suggest going for a second hardener here. I'll be honest, I think with armor's natural resistances, it makes sense to have 2 shield hardeners and 1 booster, but for me, armor is always 2 reppers and 1 hardener. It just seems to work better that way. Now, looking at the rigs, on the left-hand side, I've gone for an auxiliary nano pump for additional armor repair, so that those armor repairers can do absolute overtime with those, followed by a armor pump 3 and an anti-explosive pump. The anti-explosive pump obviously gets rid of that weakness in the explosive tank, and the Trimark armor pump just gives us an additional boost to our overall hit points. Now, this was kind of based on what I had going, and a lot of people I spoke to were very mixed about this. Some really liked this idea. Bigger hit points on what is already a decent armor tank, plus some good rep speed is nice. Other people want you to push that thermal hole, make sure that, you know, you have that additional resistance there. But quite frankly, if you're not taking much in the way of thermal damage, I mean, thermal is one of those things that almost every weapon type has it, let's be fair. Lasers do electromagnetic and thermal, missiles do omni-type, your railguns do thermal and kinetic. Heck, even, even cannons do a little bit of thermal in there as well. But for the most part, it tends not to be a huge amount of damage, so you can push into the thermal resistance there if you want to. I went for the anti-explosive pump and just the flat-out HP bonus, but it is kind of up to you which way you decide you want to go with that. For the engineering rigs, an ancillary power grid router just allows us to get those large missiles in there, and then for our other 2 rigs, if it's going to let me to load this, There we go. So I'm having bad internet today. Capacitor control circuit and a semiconductor memory cell. Now, normally I'd go for the 3s on these, but I just didn't have them handy. Obviously, getting capacitor stability is always a nice thing. You're never going to hit fully stable with a fit like this, but you're not obviously going to be running everything most of the time anyway, so you can kind of get away with it. Now, the 3rd slot, some people did say, well, okay, if you're not going for the large missiles, for example, and you wanted to do medium lasers or medium cannons or whatever because you've got skills in those, then obviously you can swap out that power grid router instead for either more capacitor stability or flight speed with some auxiliary thrusters. I have seen targeting even be used on there. We had some really interesting discussions on this one, and again, rigs were one of those things that just caused, not arguments is the wrong word, but everyone had different ideas of what they would fit there. This is ultimately what I've settled for this fit. And yeah, the DPS is astonishingly low. It's less than 600 DPS, I get that, but we've got a good amount of tank here, 28,898, nearly 29,000 tank, whilst we're docked in a hangar sitting here cold. That goes nice and high when we undock and switch everything on, especially the DCU. Capacitor stability as well, 2 minutes 5 seconds, not bad at all for a PvP related ship. Obviously our weapons are going to keep firing when we are out of capacitor, our drones will keep firing when we're out of capacitor, and obviously that 2 minutes 5 seconds is based on having all of your modules active. If you're not taking much damage, then you may not need to have both of your repairers on. If you're not actually, you know, in need of changing your speed or distance, you can take the afterburner off and suddenly just not have to worry about that either, and you get a lot closer to capacitor stability than this might have you believe. Ultimately, what we're looking at is a very tanky ship that can basically punch and brute and brawl. It can snipe against anything that's up to 35 kilometers away. Excellent for gate camps, excellent for patrolling. Kind of ship that is going to take a massive beating before it goes down, allowing you to gather a lot of intel if you're sort of roaming a patrol in your space and happen to come across an enemy fleet. You can get some good intel whilst this ship just stands there. Maybe, who knows, you might be lucky enough to even survive and get away, or get a couple of kills before you go down. Entirely up to you. Ultimately though, to be completely honest, the Vexor II is not really a ship I feel I can recommend all that much, because I just think that if you want something that's ridiculously tanky and uses drones, the Healer is the better option. If you want something nimble to go roaming with, then the Arbitrator 3 Covert Ops for a similar price is just going to get you equally as much bang for your buck and a little bit more on sort of the survivability and utility. But if you're in the market for something to apply some brute force against your enemy's face, the Vexor II is certainly an option. If you are using the Vexor II though, I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section down below. I'd love to know how you get on with this ship, what you would recommend for a fitting, because I'm suggesting stuff in this video. There's a misconception going around that when I put a fitting out, I think, oh, this is the very best singular fit ever. There is no such thing in EVE, there is no such thing as the best fit for any single ship. It is going to depend on your skills, it's going to depend on what you have available, it's going to depend exactly on what you want to do playstyle wise, whether you're solo roaming, going with a fleet, and then things are going to be even more mixed up because you may be wanting to cover other weaknesses in your fleet. I'm not going to go into this. There's so much there. This is not meant to be a be-all, end-all, just to give you some inspiration on where to start with the Vexor II. If you're interested in the ship, check the comment section down below. Hopefully some enterprising git will have filled in some cool comments down there saying, here's how I run the Vexor II, here's how you should consider running it, here's how we can improve on Benzi's fit. Anyway, folks, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Otherwise, thank you for watching right the way through to the end on this one. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden!